ಸರ್ಕಾರಿ ಪ್ರಥಮ ದರ್ಜೆ ಕಾಲೇಜು ಫ್ರೇಜರ್ ಟೌನ್ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಆಯೋಜಿಸಿರುವ 10 ದಿನಗಳ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಯ ಮಟ್ಟದ ಬೋಧಕರ ಕೌಶಲ್ಯ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ತಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಆದರದ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಶರಣು, ಬನ್ನಿ. ಇವತ್ತಿನ ದಿನದ ಆಶಯ ಕವಿತೆಯನ್ನ ನಾನು ಶ್ರೀಯುತ ಡಿ.ವಿ. ಗುಂಡಪ್ಪನವರ ಮಂಕುತಿಮ್ಮನ ಕಗ್ಗದಿಂದ ಆಯ್ಕೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಸುಮಾರು 2-3 ಸಲಿ ನೀವ್ ಯಾಕೆ ಮಂಕುತಿಮ್ಮನ ಕಗ್ಗದಿಂದನೇ ಆಯ್ಕೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀರಾ ಅಂತ ತಾವೇನಾದ್ರೂ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಮಂಕುತಿಮ್ಮನ ಕಗ್ಗ ಎಂದಿಗೂ ಮುಗಿಯದ ನಿರಂತರ ಸುಖ ಪಯಣ, ದಣಿಯದೇ ಇರುವಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಕಾವ್ಯದ ರಸ ದೌತಣ. ಸೊ ಅದರಿಂದ ಒಂದು ತುಣುಕನ್ನ ನಾನು ಆಯ್ಕೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಮುತ್ತಿರುವುದಿಂದು ಭೂಮಿಯನೊಂದು ದುರ್ದೈವ, ಮುತ್ತಿರುವುದಿಂದು ಭೂಮಿಯನೊಂದು ದುರ್ದೈವ, ಮೃತ್ಯು ಕುಣಿಯುತ್ತಲಿಹನು ಕೇಕೆ ಹಾಕುತ್ತಲಿ, ಮೃತ್ಯು ಕುಣಿಯುತ್ತಲಿಹನು ಕೇಕೆ ಹಾಕುತ್ತಲಿ, ಸುತ್ತಿಪುದು ತಲೆಯ ನನು ದಿನದ ಲೋಕದ ವಾರ್ತೆ, ಸುತ್ತಿಪುದು ತಲೆಯ ನನು ದಿನವೂ ಲೋಕದ ವಾರ್ತೆ, ಎತ್ತಲಿದಕ್ಕೆಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆ ಮಂಕುತಿಮ್ಮ. ಮಹಾನುಭಾವ ಪ್ರಾತಸ್ಮರಣೀಯರು ಅಷ್ಟು ವರ್ಷಗಳ ಹಿಂದೆನೆ ಈ ರೀತಿ ಆಗಬಹುದೇನೋ ಈ ಭೂಮಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ಕಲ್ಪನೆ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ದಿನ ನಿಜ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ ನೋಡಿ ಬಂಧುಗಳೇ. ಒಂದು ವಾಕ್ಯವೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ದಿನದ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯ ಕನ್ನಡಿ ಹಿಡಿದಾಗೆ ಪ್ರಾತಸ್ಮರಣೀಯರು ಬರೆದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಯಾವಾಗ ಇದಕ್ಕೆಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆ ಆ ಮೃತ್ಯು ಸುತ್ತ ಕೇಕೆ ಹಾಕ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಸುತ್ತ ನಮ್ಮ ತಲೆ ತಿರುಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ವಾರ್ತೆಗಳನ್ನ ಕೇಳಿ ಭಯ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಅರಿವಿಕೆಯ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಈಗ ಕಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಶುರು ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಬಸವಣ್ಣನವರು ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಅಂಜಿದರಾಗದು ಅಳುಕಿದರಾಗದು, ವಜ್ರ ಪಂಜರದೊಳಗಿದ್ದರಾಗದು, ತಪ್ಪುವುದೋ ಲಲಾಟ ಲಿಖಿತ, ಕಕ್ಕು ಲತೆಗೆ ಬಂದರಾಗದು ಧೃತಿ ಕೆಟ್ಟು, ಮನ ಧಾತುಗೆಟ್ಟರೆ ಅಪ್ಪುದು ತಪ್ಪುದು ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ ದೇವ ಅಂತ ಭಗವಾನ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಅಂಜಿದರಾಗದು, ನಾವೇನ್ ಅಂಜುತ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ, ನಾವು ಅಳಗ್ತಾನೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಈ ಒಂದು ದುರ್ದೈವ ಏನ್ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಅದು ಶ್ರೀಮಂತರಿಗೆ ಬಡವರಿಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಒಂದೇ ತರ ಬಂದಿದೆ. ವಜ್ರಪರದೊಳಗೆ ಇಂದ್ರೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರೀತಿ ವಾತ್ಸಲ್ಯ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ತಕ್ಕಲ್ಲ, ಅದರಿಂದ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ನಾವು ಧೃತಿ ಕೆಡೋ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇದು ಎಲ್ಲದಕ್ಕೂ ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ ದೇವ ಕಾಪಾಡ್ತಾನೆ ಅಂತ ಶ್ರೀಯುತರು ಆಶೀರ್ವಚನ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಖಂಡಿತ ದೇವರ ಒಂದು ಅನುಗ್ರಹ ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಈ 2 ಕವಿತೆಗಳ ಆಶಯದಿಂದ ತಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ದಿನದ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಏನು ಅಂತ ನೀವು ಮನಗಂಡಿರ್ತೀರಿ. ವೆರಿ ಗುಡ್ ಮಾರ್ನಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಒನ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಆಲ್ ಹೂ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಜಾಯಿಂಡ್ ಅಸ್ ಟುಡೇ ಫಾರ್ ಅವರ್ 10-day ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಲೆವೆಲ್ online faculty development series organized by Government First State College, Fraser Town, Bangalore. I, Girish BN, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce and Management, cordially invite you all, welcome you all to join us today for our 8th session of this FDP series. The topic of the day is so drastically important. It has so much of weightage, which requires us to have an overall dimensional understanding about what exactly is happening. And one of such important paradigm that we need to always look at this COVID scenario is from the sociological perspective. It is said by Bharati Gete, a very prominent sociologist, social distancing is an important response to the pandemic, but we need to ensure that it does not become social isolation or alienation, particularly for the vulnerable groups of the society. So beautifully said, which would definitely put us into a full circle of how this social distancing should all be, because there are already vulnerable groups which have been severely affected. Further, Neha Bagaria, jobs for her HR consultant, says, this is a time when working from home is the new normal. The number of women looking to start or restart their career has also risen dramatically in recent time. I should thank her. She is taking a positive note out of such a dilapidated situation. Dr. Michael Wren, WHO Informal Advisory Group, says epidemics are a stress test for a system. The issue is how much resilience is built into this system. With these notes, dear participant, I welcome you all to today's topic, sociological strategies to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. We are honored, we are privileged to have amongst us a celebrated sociologist, a researcher, an academician, and a scholar with high caliber who has agreed to share her thoughts, profound thoughts on this dimension of COVID-19, Dr. Manjula V. Dr. Manjula V currently is working as an assistant professor, Department of Sociology, Government First State College, Kanakpura. She has done her post-graduation in sociology by bagging second rank, which speaks volumes about your caliber, ma'am. She has done her NET, SLET, and PGDFM from Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. She has done her postdoctoral degree with a unique title called Social Dynamics of Trading and Networking Between Stock Market Participants, a sociological study of Bangalore Stock Exchange. I definitely need to congratulate you, ma'am, for taking up a highly innovative topic, which happens to be the current trend in commerce and management. We, commerce and management faculty, particularly finance faculty, are very much interested in the latest developments that are happening in behavioral finance, and your topic is so very related to us. Definitely we commerce people can take your insights towards exploring various dimensions of behavioral finance. We will, I think after this participation, we will not leave you. Ma'am, as I told you, is a scholar with high caliber, and she has presented several papers in national and international conferences. I would just read out a few of her unique topics: social dynamics of gender and risk in stock markets, a topic which we commerce people would always like to focus. And madam has also done a paper on sociability and stock market participation, a sociological study of investors from Bangalore. She's authored a paper on secondary markets and gender influences in a sociological study. And further, she's also written a paper decoding the dynamics of gender and risk in stock markets. Beautiful topics, ma'am. Hats off to you. Moving on, ma'am has also explored various other dimensions of applications of sociology. She has authored a paper on stigmatization to medicalization, the changing ethos of involuntary childlessness. Ma'am, that exposes a very important aspect of your personality. Further, ma'am has also authored a paper on methodological schemes in sociological inquiries on social constructs of leisure. A very unique topic, ma'am. I really appreciate your talent in identifying this. She has chaired several research committees. She has attended hundreds of workshops. Now, this is a big list which I'll not be reading. And ma'am has delivered special lectures on socialization process and sociological imagination at Police Public School, Bangalore. And ma'am has also authored a book on Vyaktitva Vikasana, personality development textbook for BA, BSc, BCom, BBM, and BHM. Dear participants, now I think you all have got an idea of what this personality is all about. So let us invite her on behalf of Government First State College, Frasertown, and on behalf of hundreds of participants. I would extend a cordial welcome to you, madam. Over to you. Hello, Manjula ma'am.
Good morning, sir.
Very good morning, ma'am.
I hope I'm audible. Good morning to all the participants. And thank you so much, sir, for that beautiful introduction. I'm overwhelmed.
Privilege is ours, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, your audio feed is good. Your video feed is good. You can start, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, I just start screen sharing, sir.
Yeah, you can start it, ma'am.
I'm getting host disabled participants.
No. I've done it.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, ma'am. Continue, ma'am.
Okay. A very good morning again to all the participants, and thank you to Government First Grade College, Frasertown, for giving me this opportunity to deliberate on the sociological strategies to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. I'm Dr. Manjulavi from Government First Grade College, Kanakpura. During the span of this particular lecture, I'm going to be talking on the social context, the sociological approach, sociological strategies, and then I'll be concluding with remarks unique to the sociological perspective. During the course of this faculty development program, we have looked into the changing aspirations in today's dynamic scenario. Faculty members from various disciplines have come together to participate and deliberate about various issues related to what is this pandemic, who is responsible, what are our responsibilities during the course of this pandemic. And I'm here to contribute from the sociological perspective. The social context. The coronavirus epidemic is a classic right now crisis. A disease that has entered the human population and is quickly claiming hundreds and thousands of lives. Hospitals around the world have reached their limits. In December 2019, a new coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, emerged, sparking an epidemic of acute respiratory syndrome, what we call the COVID-19 in humans. It emerged from Wuhan in China. Within 3 months, this virus spread to more than 11,800 cases and caused 4,281 deaths in 114 countries. The World Health Organization declared this as a global pandemic. The pandemic has led to a massive global public health campaign to slow the spread of the virus by increasing hand washing, reducing face touching, wearing masks in public, and physical distancing. It has now been more than 100 days since WHO was notified of the first case of what we call COVID-19. Healthcare providers are going far beyond their professional obligation to support the sick and the dying. The coronavirus has forced many of us to go home and shelter.
Ma'am?
Right now, I'm sharing the social context, the pandemic and changing dynamics. As I was telling, COVID-19 is something that has sparked universal response to this pandemic. It has spread like wildfire, and it's been, as I was telling, more than 100 days since it was notified as a pandemic, and the response that we are supposed to be giving for this is also to be done at a very massive scale. The global spread of this virus has overwhelmed all of us. What this means is we have to learn to live with this since there is no vaccine coming up. We have to live and learn to live with the risk posed by this coronavirus, just as people persisted during the times of other contagions. So living with this new normal scenario has become the need of the hour. Before I begin on why we have to deliberate about this issue in so much detail, I'd like to draw our attention to the changes that have occurred in the higher education sector post-COVID-19. What might other disciplines have to say about this is something that really intrigues me. What are the theories, frameworks, and methods of academic disciplines in which each of us are trained reveal about higher education response to COVID-19? How does an economist, a historian, a biologist, a physiologist, an anthropologist make sense of the changes that's happening across the higher education system? As a sociologist, I'm interested in the organizational culture and the structural conditions that enable or impede institutions from mounting an effective response to COVID-19. During the short intervention, the lockdown, I was wondering about the conditions that will enable some institutions to effectively and efficiently accomplish the rapid transition. Most of us almost overnight switched on from residential teaching to remote teaching. How does this COVID-19 order the existing power relationships and status hierarchy within colleges and universities is something that I'm really fascinated about. What will COVID-19 mean to marginalized higher education population, such as the guest faculty? You must all be aware of that unfortunate incident that occurred with two guest faculties in Karnataka. Will the pandemic increase the quantities and the quality of the learning outcomes that already is deeply embedded in the existing scenario? Across higher education system, COVID-19 has brought about a lot of changes. Various levels of stratifications have emerged between institutions of higher learning, with prospects of independent schools diverging and new methods of teaching coming up. How will this sudden necessity to move to remote teaching and learning change the culture within educational institutions? What is the responses of various stakeholders, the teachers, the students who are suddenly forced to shift from campus learning to online learning? What are the factors that is going to make this transition smooth, or what are the factors that is going to impede this process? I am a social scientist, an academic trained academician who is interested in social network theories. My studies only college universities and am within the discipline of sociology. I help societies respond to sociological view. A sociologist interested in and structural efficacies. Today, in this session, I would like to bring all your attention to the sociological strategies that would help to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 as academicians and as individuals in the society. What are the insights that sociology offers? While efforts to develop pharmaceutical interventions for COVID-19 are underway, the social and behavioral sciences can also provide valuable insights for managing the pandemic and its impacts. Insights can be provided to tackle the different stages of current pandemic to help policymakers, leaders, and public better understand how to manage the threats, navigate different social and cultural contexts, improve science communication, align individual and social interests, and employ effective leadership and provide social and emotional support. This is what I'm going to be deliberating upon. So these are the various areas that will be considered through the course of this lecture: the threat perception, prejudice and discrimination, emotion and risk perception, disaster, and pandemic. While COVID-19 as a sickness or the capacity of the health systems can be analyzed from the perspective of public health and medical sciences, a broader perspective is necessary because this is materializing within the society, and how we respond to risk within this context of time and space is very important. This risk has accumulated through the interaction of range of factors such as economic, social, territorial, and environmental processes. This totally constitutes the SARS-CoV response. This is a risk which is extensive in the sense that the coronavirus and its social and economic impacts have spread out in expansive territorial waves. From the initial outbreak in Wuhan, China, which we thought is going to be contained within that area, has now spread globally. It's already transnational in its character, and by manifestation, it is heterogeneous. And because of this, the risk patterns that is imposed by this virus is different for various nations. This requires a local tackling of this virus. In the regions and localities most exposed and the people who are most vulnerable to threat, the risk manifests intensively, affecting a significant part of the population and severely stressing or collapsing public health systems. This pandemic is characterized by the sequential and cascading risk that it imposes. Unlike other disasters, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this is not the first virus or this is not the first pandemic that we are facing, but unlike others, this is different. It has no direct damage or destruction to something physical, the housing or infrastructure or the loss of crops or produced goods, something that is tangible, which can be seen, is not being affected. However, the risk that this is imposing is much more profound. It is impacting us not just socially, physically, but also psychologically. And this is the primary risk associated with this virus. It materializes in terms of various secondary risks, such as the impact on the health system, the collapsing of the economy, and our response to disaster management or risk management that is being thrown away. What is happening here is what sociology tries to investigate. Threat perception. This is the first aspect that sociology looks into. Historically, infectious diseases have been responsible for the greatest human death tolls. For example, the bubonic plague killed approximately 25% of the European population. Sociology enables an understanding of how people are likely to perceive and respond to threats and risks during a pandemic and downstream the consequences for decision making and intergroup relationships. This is very, very important about how people understand what is the risk, the threat, the fear of what is happening. One of the most central emotional responses during a pandemic is that of fear. Humans, like other animals, possess a set of defensive systems for combating ecological threats. Negative emotions resulting from threat can be contagious, and fear can make threats appear more imminent. A meta-analysis found that targeting fears can be useful in some situations, but not always. Appealing to this fear leads people to change their behavior if they feel capable of dealing with the threat. If I can deal with the threat, I'm fine. I'll change my behavior. But it also leads to defensive reactions when they feel helpless to act. I have nothing to do. I'm helpless in this situation. This kind of a thing will lead to a defensive reaction. The results of this kind of studies suggest that strong fear appeals produce the greatest behavior change only when people feel a sense of efficacy. Whereas strong fear appeals with low efficacy messages produce the greatest levels of defensive responses. Here, the challenge is of the optimism bias. Optimism is bias is that the belief that bad things are not likely to happen to me. It is only going to befall others. This is called as the optimism bias. And in this COVID-19 situation also, right now we see that there is a lot of optimism bias. When there was lockdown with minimum number of cases, we were all afraid of what is this pandemic? How is this COVID-19 going to treat us? And this kind of questions made us to stay home, stay safe. That became the mantra. But then once this lockdown was lifted, lifting the lockdown does not mean that the COVID-19 challenge is gone. But what is happening now? We are out in the open. We are more carefree than earlier, which should not happen. This is happening because of the optimism bias. While optimism bias may be useful for avoiding negative emotions, it can lead people to underestimate their likelihood of contracting the disease and therefore ignore public warnings. In this situation, sociology suggests that communication strategies must strike a balance between breaking through optimism bias without inducing excessive feelings of anxiety and dread. The second concept that sociology discusses is the emotion and risk perception. As we've seen, sound health decisions depend on accurate perception of cost and benefits of certain choices for oneself and for society. If I wash my hands regularly, what does it entail for me? How am I going to benefit out of it? What is the cost of hand washing and what is the benefit that I'm going to get? These kind of choices that we make is very important in terms of sound health decisions. And these decisions are based on emotions. Emotions often drive risk perceptions, sometimes more so than the factual information. An emotional response to a risky situation can influence thinking in two stages. First, the emotion's quality. For instance, positive versus negative. And then the focus on people on congruent information. For instance, where is this negative information coming? When is this negative information coming? That information, rather than the feeling itself, is then used to guide our judgments at the second stage. For instance, most of the smokers know that smoking is injurious to health, but still they go ahead and smoke. They spend more time examining the warnings and then recall the risks associated with it and the subsequent effects of risk perception, but still deter themselves from quitting. As a negative emotion increases, even in case of this COVID-19, people may rely on negative information about COVID-19 more than the information that is coming from accurate, authentic sources while making their decisions. In the case of strong emotional reactions, people may also ignore important numeric information such as probabilities and a problem scope. Negative framing captures attention, especially for people who are less mathematically skilled, who will get into all the numbers. So it's better to ignore it. The media usually reports COVID-19 very negatively. For instance, the number of people infected and those who die. When these two are given, the reporting about the number of people who are infected will be more, and the number of people who die will be projected more, as opposed to those who have recovered or those who experience only mild symptoms. This may increase negative emotion and sensitize people to otherwise neglected risk for themselves or others. Research is needed to determine whether a more positive frame could educate the public and relieve negative emotions while increasing public health behaviors. And the third aspect is prejudice and discrimination. The experience of fear and the threat has ramifications not only on how people think about themselves, but also on how they feel about and react to others, in particular, outgroups. The outsiders. So outsiders are given a lesser stance. So because of this, greater fear and perceived threat are associated with greater intolerance. And worst of all is the punitive attitudes towards outgroups. Highlighting group boundaries can undermine empathy with those who are socially distant and increase dehumanization or punishment. We've seen in India itself how massive violence and then instances of apathy, not being able to relate to the other groups have developed and have surfaced at various instances throughout history. What we are afraid as sociologists is that this should not repeat in times of COVID. No group should be considered as an outsider. Although not every pandemic leads to violence, disease threat can nonetheless give rise to discrimination and violence against stigmatized or scapegoated groups. Already, there have been reports of physical attacks on ethnic Asian people in predominantly white countries, and some governments have officially mischaracterized this SARS-CoV-2 as Wuhan or Chinese virus. This is putting somebody as the other and blaming them for what is happening right now. Conversely, a global pandemic may also create opportunities to reduce these religious and ethnic prejudices. This is what should be happening. Coordinated efforts across individuals, communities, governments to fight the spread of disease can send strong signals to cooperation and shared values. This can further facilitate recognition of previously considered outgroups and in-groups into a single community with a common destiny. This superordinate categorization is most effective when everyone is of equal status. Therefore, cooperative acts which are already unfolding. We've seen innumerable examples of help pouring in from all quarters to those affected. It's very, very important. This will help us in overcoming this pandemic effects. And highlighting events like this can improve the outgroup attitude and foster further international cooperation. And then moving on, our reaction to disaster and the panic associated with it. There is a common belief in popular culture that when in peril, people panic, especially when in crowds. You must have observed that our response when we are alone is different from our response when we are in a crowd. People who are very shy, who would never jeer at anyone, will do so when they are in a group. This act is because of that crowd mentality. We act blindly and excessively most of the time in disaster and panic situations, basically because of this act of self-preservation, which potentially endangers their survival. This idea has been used in sociology to explain the responses to the current COVID-19 outbreak, most commonly in relation to the notion of public panic buying. Most of us must have seen empty shelves in shops where people have bought in stuff anticipating something is going to happen and they'll not be able to access the essential commodities. And this kind of panic buying, when we have a closer inspection of what happens during these disasters, reveals a different picture. Certainly, some people do act selfishly, and some, especially those who are particularly vulnerable, may experience more distress, especially the senior citizens. But cooperation and orderly norm-governed behavior are common across a range of emergencies and disasters. And there are instances when people display remarkable altruism. We've seen many, many instances of altruism in the Indian context, and this is something that must be encouraging for us. There is already evidence that mutual aid groups among the public have become widespread in response to COVID-19. Indeed, in times of disasters like fire and other natural hazards, people are less likely to die from overreaction than from underreaction. That is, not responding is more dangerous than responding excessively to signs of danger until it is too late. And finally, the third aspect, the aspects that again I would like to draw your attention upon, the proposal that sociology is giving to the society at large and all the other disciplines is that there are three aspects that must be kept in mind while trying to mitigate the responses for this COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic represents a massive global health crisis. Because this crisis requires large-scale behavior change and places scientific, psychological burdens on individuals, insights from sociology can be used to help align behavior with the recommendations of epidemiologists and public health experts. And what are these suggestions? The first is physical distancing and isolation, social network-based distance strategies, and localized decision making. I'm using the term physical distance and not social distance. Why? As sociologists, the concept of social distance actually is a way of stopping communication with one another. It is a negative connotation term. The World Health Organization, in fact, has started using the phrase physical distancing instead of social distancing as a way to spread the novel coronavirus from people to people. A move widely welcomed by sociologists as a step in the right direction. Social distance makes it sound like people should stop communicating with one another, while instead we should be preserving as much community as we can while keeping our physical distance from one another. So what we need to do right now is to maintain physical distance. Physical distance to protect everyone's physical well-being. But mental well-being is obviously also very important. And social isolation is not good for mental well-being. Many psychologists and sociologists say that this change of terminology by WHO is something that is long overdue. It has occurred to me especially when this unfortunate choice of word was made. When they proposed this concept of social distancing, the first thing that came to my mind was about what has historically happened in India, the social distancing between various groups within the Indian community. So this word, I would suggest, should be avoided while using the concept of physical distance, because what we are trying to portray here is maintain this distance physically. Physical distance is something that is measured in metric meters or centimeters. It is the geographical distance from one person to another, person A, while social distance is a measure of distance across social boundaries. So the physical distance must be maintained and not social distancing. It is good that WHO finally has corrected an early error of mistaking physical distance for social distance. In these strange times of virus, we want clear physical distance, minimum of 2 meters or so. But at the same time, we want people to remain close to each other socially. While social distancing is still widely used, it may be sending the wrong message and contribute to social isolation. Rather than sounding like you have to socially separate your family and friends, physical distancing simplifies this concept with the emphasis on keeping 6 feet away from each other. So I would suggest all my academic fraternity to kindly refrain from using the concept of social distancing and adopt using the term physical distancing. Moving on. Sociology proposes this social network-based distancing strategies. So what is a social network? A social network is a social structure. It is basically made up of a set of social actors, such as individuals or organizations. A family is a set of dyadic tribes, 2 or more people, dyadic, triadic tribes. And these kind of social networks is what actually makes up the society as a whole. While the non-pharmaceutical inventions of social distancing is key policy to combat the spread of COVID-19 by maintaining physical distance and reducing social interactions, the primary aim is to reduce and decrease the rate of transmission of COVID-19. So, as you can see here, each of us are connected as various nodes and ties in the society. If we limit our interaction with other ties, then the spread of the disease can be curtailed to a great extent. Common social distancing measures have already been put in place, aiming to slow the transmission. There are various bans on public events, the closure of schools, universities, non-essential workplace activities, limiting the public transportation, travel, movement, and physical restrictions. These will help in curtailing the number of contacts that a node comes into with other people. While doing this, such social distancing interventions during previous outbreaks, earlier SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome that came up in 2003, have often been based on expert recommendations. So when doing such things, existing research also shows that this will help in curtailing the spread of the outbreak. Cancelling public gatherings and imposing travel restrictions decreases the transmission and morbidity rates. This is absolutely necessary now. Virtually, the number of research that supports this is really high. In most of these cases, they have considered the impact that the social network has and what can we do until and vaccination is actually there in the market for us to use. Since most facets of economic and social life require person-to-person contact, it becomes almost impossible to extremely difficult to actually reduce the contacts that we have. Therefore, strategically reducing contacts is favorable to complete isolation. Increasing contact can likewise counter negative social, physiological, and economic costs of quarantining individuals over prolonged periods of time and to avoid compliance fatigue. We are almost there, reaching that point of compliance fatigue, where we are supposed to be forced to stay indoors, forced to stay away, maintain that physical distance. So this should not happen. To achieve this aim, what we should do is propose behavioral network-based strategies for selective contact reduction. If I tell you stay away from everyone totally, then it becomes really difficult to follow. But if we propose a behavioral change, a small behavioral change where you say, instead of meeting 10 people, you can meet 3 people. And these are the 3 that you are going to be in touch with. It is very, very important to maintain that psychological stability of mind. By doing this, we can not only reduce the number of contacts and the spread of diseases, but we can also apply these insights to ensure that this pandemic is not growing at a very fast pace. Applying insights from social and statistical network science, we can demonstrate effectively how changing network configurations of individuals' contact choices and organizational routines can alter the rate and the spread of the virus by providing guidelines to differentiate between high and low impact contacts for the spread of the disease. So it is very, very important. This approach balances public health concerns with social, psychological, and economic needs for interpersonal interaction. Flattening the infection curve is what is very important to us, while also ensuring that we are psychologically not being impacted. Such social distancing policies are implicitly designed to achieve by limiting the amount of social contact between individuals. This is an approach that sociology proposes from its social network perspective. Moving on, this is a diagram, the graph that actually states, it effectively shows how localizing the contacts can help in flattening the curve. From a social network perspective, the shape of this infection curve is closely related to the concept of network distance. Network distance is nothing but the length of the path. How close is someone to me? How possible it is that an infection can spread from me. This network and the popular theory of 6 degrees of separation phenomenon. 6 degrees of separation phenomenon states that you are away from any other point of contact in the entire world by 6 degrees. You connect 6 people in the process and you will reach the person that you are aiming to talk to. So this is the 6 degrees of separation theory, and this theory is what is being used here. So for an infection to reach from point A in a globe to point B in another point of the world takes only 6 points of contact. And it is very, very important to ensure that these 6 steps are not being taken. And that is where social network theory plays a very, very important role. The insight from the social network theory plays an important role. It claims that any two people connected through at most 5 acquaintances will be able to spread the disease. So what is necessary here is to ensure that this point of contact is not taking that 6 steps to reach the other contact. And with this simple strategy, we can ensure that the COVID-19 node does not reach other points and the disease spread is curtailed then and there. This is again the social network theory taken to a different level, where we are talking about localized decision making. Sociologists propose a series of strategies on how individuals can make local decisions to achieve this goal. Understanding which type of strategies of targeted contact reduction, social distancing are more effective and efficient will help in flattening the curve as soon as possible. The contact reduction strategies are proposed based on insights into how items flow through network, such as diseases, or you might even see information or ideas that flows from one person to another. This is a totally connected network. All nodes and ties are equally connected to every other group. When we are distancing, when we are maintaining that physical distance, the spread is generally hampered. So the density of the connection is reduced, and as such, the contacts that is being established and the spread of the disease will be curtailed. When commuters travel between isolated villages, the network distance increases. But today, because of all the methods that we have for transportation, it is very, very easy to reach from point A to point B. And because of that, the number of points that we come into contact with will increase immensely. If today we were to trace the last 1 hour that we've traveled to, you'll notice how much of contacts that we have actually come through. So social distancing or the physical distancing strategies will increase in reducing this network density and helps in decreasing the clustering and eliminating the shortcuts. And so here the figures depict a network in which densely connected communities are bridged by random long-range ties. This is the first one. And then in similar communities, the last figure, this one, shows how successive targeted contact reduction strategies will help in reducing. This can be seen in the bar graph. When all the ties are connected, the number of cases that is possible. And the last one shows the minimal contact in a small world network, what happens. And these are examples derived from network mapping, where all ties are removed. Ties are the social connections. When all ties are removed, how dissimilar and how far away can
I'm sorry to
No,
interrupt.
sure, residents seem to be extremely effective. Segregation of economic
Manjula ma'am.
zones and large demographic groups such as ethnic and racial segregation is definitely helping us in reducing the contact that the disease is having. This is a strategy that sociology proposes. After considering these three strategies, I would like to go to the conclusion where I'm talking about the social context, the science communication, aligning individual and collective interests and stress coping mechanisms can help from a sociological perspective. Considering the social context, slowing the viral transmission during this pandemic requires significant shifts in behavior. It cannot be just done overnight. Various aspects of social and cultural context influence the extent and the speed of the behavioral change. If somebody suggests today, adopt this method, it is not going to happen by the next day. It takes a long time because there are various aspects that governs the social context, the social norms. Social norms are the rules that is applicable to a society. In the Indian context, there were a lot of memes or the slides that were coming up, which said the spread of the virus in India is not as much as it is happening elsewhere. One important reason is the social norms in the Indian society. In Indian society, it is encouraged to leave your footwear outside. Just as you enter your house, you are encouraged to wash your hands and feet. So practices like these, small social norms that is already being practiced in Indian context has gone a long way in helping to reduce the spread of the disease. And we are not people who generally have a hug. We are someone who says namaste. These kind of social norms has definitely helped in the Indian context to reduce the spread of the uh, virus in the Indian society. There are various instances like this which is actually influenced by social norms. People's behavior is influenced by social norms because we learn various things from society. How we think, how we perceive things, how we approve or disapprove certain actions is all conditioned by the society that we live in. And this goes a long way in molding our behavior. So sociology encourages all the other disciplines also to look into this very important aspects of the social norms and the context in which an health promoting activity is being promoted. Hand washing was taken up very easily in India. Why? Why so? Because we already had this practice of washing your hands before various activities. And this kind of small instances should not be underestimated while trying to inculcate healthy behavior practices in a larger group. The second thing is the social inequality. Social inequality is a very extremely important variable that determines how much of uh, inputs or how much of support that a person gets in the society while trying to mitigate the effects of a pandemic. There were certain sectors in the Indian context that could easily work from home, easily take their roles and activities to a virtual space. But there were many others who could not do so. This is because of social inequality. People, the migrant laborers, the daily wage earners, these people did not have any other option but to go out there and do their work. So this kind of inequalities, they could not even stay at home, refrain themselves from working because to earn the next morsel of food, they had to go and work. When changing the behavior of such groups, we must also keep in mind the social inequality that is already there and develop strategies that can be more effective for them. Just adopting one total lockdown strategy will not work for everyone, especially not in a nation like India, where we have so many diverse groups and so much of inequalities embedded in our social system. So we must do something that people find is desirable, which does not come across as something that is being imposed, which is something which is interrupting their normal everyday activities. Doing such things will definitely increase positive behavior among people. And the next thing is a conspiracy theories. conspiracy theories that have come up during this science communication. We've seen that social inequality and unequal access to resources has panned out in different way to different communities. In the same way, the information that is being passed on from one community to another community, from one social structure to another social structure is extremely different. If there is a finding, many of us must have seen many times that there were instances of a miracle cure that has already come up, something that is going to cure everyone of COVID-19. There were claims and informations circulating at various places. These kind of communication actually deters the positive aspects of the efforts that is being made by the frontline warriors. It could be the doctors or the government which is trying to curtail the effects of this virus. The information environment around the pandemic usually underscores the importance of effective science communication. Only when what is already there is reaching the people properly can it be effective. The COVID-19 pandemic has seen many instances where conspiracy theories, fake news, misinformation, etc. was circulated like it is absolutely authentic. In this context, it is hard for the public to distinguish between scientific evidence and facts from fiction. So, as sociologists, we suggest that whenever information is being passed on, whatever research findings has come up, it must be explained through proper channels of communication. And here it becomes important that there is an established channel of communication, a channel that is authentic, that can be relied by the people to gather their information. This is very, very important, and it reduces to a very great instance the frustration that occurs because of lack of information. So conspiracy theories must be avoided as much as possible. This is the second conclusion. And then moving on, we have to align the behavior of individuals with the collective interest. This is very important. We as human beings do things or adopt a behavior only when we find that it is beneficial to us. If a new thing is proposed, the first thing we ask is, how is this going to benefit me? So to ensure that the behavior that the authorities expect is in tandem with the behavior that the people will feel easy to acclimatize themselves with, will go a long way in reducing the spread of this pandemic. People who do what is right are respected and publicly admired. This is an emotion that our government is also banking upon now. So we are actually proclaiming these people as heroes, the frontline warriors, and applauding the work that they are doing, which is absolutely right, so that others also follow in the same step. This is also the carrot and stick policy. You award somebody for a right behavior, that behavior gets caught, or that behavior is adopted by others. These kinds of mechanisms of social enforcement encourage people to embrace and internalize shared guidelines, making them motivated to do what is considered right while avoiding certain behaviors that seems to be wrong. They do not rely on any legal agreements and formal sanctions for this. It is all about the network. What their network finds is acceptable, what their network finds is an good behavior, is something that they are going to adopt easily. And this is what is called as the zero-sum thinking. People often default to thinking that someone else's gain, especially someone from a competing group, necessitates a loss to themselves. If I am losing 5 rupees, it is a gain to somebody else. So I would rather keep this 5 rupees to myself, and vice versa. So this kind of zero-sum thinking usually makes the spread of a pandemic or the adopting of a new behavior very difficult. So what needs to be done here is, by staying indoors, neither are you going to lose anything, nor is somebody else gaining anything. So this kind of a zero-sum thinking will definitely help in mitigating the impact of COVID-19, and it will stop this hoarding behavior. We've seen how sanitizers, masks, vaccines were all hoarded by people because they thought if somebody else is getting, I will be deprived of it. So ensuring that something of this thing is not going to happen will give a lot of uh, pause to the spread of this COVID-19. And then moving on, we have this requirement of a good leader. A requirement of a good leader in terms of a pandemic is very, very important. There are various other crises which have given this example of how a crisis is creating an opportunity for leadership across various levels. It might be within a family, at our workplaces, local communities, and nations. A good leader can coordinate individuals and help them avoid behaviors that are no longer considered socially responsible. So we need good leaders at all stages. And good leader has this backing of that. So anything that is effective committed to the entire group and compliant automatically. During a human beings are basically social animals. We cannot stay in isolation. We cannot stay without contacting others. But this pandemic has made it imperative that we stay away from each other. And because of this, that intimate relationships have broken. Many times, intimacy has broken. And then because of this health mindset, we are not in touch with others. Because of this, the amount of stress that is being endured by each individual has gone up. It's just shot up phenomenally. Social connection helps regulate emotions. And this is very important to cope with stress and remaining resilient during difficult times. That is why even the government is proposing this helpline numbers where we can contact and get help when necessary. This loneliness and social isolation burdens an individual. It worsens that amount of stress and the deleterious effects on mental and cardiovascular system will again impact immune system. A good immune system will help in mitigating the effects of the virus. But maintaining the social distance, we are actually taking people away from each other, enhancing their stress and the burden, and then again causing mental imbalance leading to immune failure, disruptions. So we have to ensure that there is no stress. Various scholars have identified that loneliness is construed as a subjective state. So even though we are physically away from each other, I would suggest do not stay socially away. Please stay socially connected. This means you are not lonely. Even though you are in, sometimes there is a feeling that you are in a crowd and you are lonely. Now in today's thing, you are lonely both physically as well as in your mind. So this term of social distancing, that is why I again reiterate this, needs to be cut off. What we need is physical distance, not social distance. Further, these are the references that I've used in my study for this particular thing. I would again reiterate the fact that please maintain physical distance and not social distance. Thank you so much. I would like to take any questions that any of you might have. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, ma'am. Participants, I had assured you people that you would be having an intellectual deliberation from a scholarly academician, and I, as usual, proved right. So we have had a very nice intellectual deliberation from the sociological perspective, which is the need of the hour. Relevant question. I mean, we can start this question and answer session with latest thing that has happened. Yesterday, Professor Shaila Prakash Hajare from Mangalore, I believe, has asked this question. Yesterday we saw the suicide case of actor Sushant Rajput. All are shocked with it. All feel to connect with others and find a place to express our emotions. As a human in a social animal, he could not live in isolation. That's what ma'am I was trying to tell you in your absence, that the basic sociological presumption is man is a social animal.
Yes.
So can ma'am give any strong solid contact solution to the society as a sociologist?
This is exactly what I was talking about when I was proposing the social network theory as well. As sociologists, we always believe that human beings cannot exist in vacuum. We are always attached with others. It need not necessarily be the physical interaction. It can also be interaction with other human beings in various other forms. You could be writing a letter, you could be communicating with somebody else over the phone, something, some sort of communication which says that you are not alone, you have somebody else to share your feelings with is very, very important. A famous sociologist, Emile Durkheim, has conducted a study on some in very, very personal concept like the suicide. He, in his book *Le Suicide*, states suicide, as we all assume, is not something that is personal. It is something that is enforced by the society. Take, for instance, a student of 10th standard who is failing in examination, the way that student is going to react to the outcome. Some students will take it in a very light manner. They'll say, it's okay, I flunked this time, it's okay, I'll attempt once again. But look at the same result for some other student. He will go to such kind of depression where he is going to, he or she for that matter, will go and contemplate the option of suicide as an easy way out. This is happening because of the social circumstances that person is living in. For one, the society is teaching it's okay, you can take it light, failure is not everything. For the other, the same social circumstances is teaching failure is the ultimate. You have failed in what you are supposed to be delivering. So you have no rights to exist. And this is what drives a person to suicide. Durkheim states, in fact, when people have holidays, the instances of suicides increases. So people always need other human beings with them to stay alive. This is a basic presumption, and this is a very, very essential aspect of the human beings, that we always live in groups. We need people with us. Otherwise, it is extremely difficult to survive. That is what differentiates human beings from other animals. We are social animals, not just animals.
Yeah, fair enough, ma'am. Thank you for asking that question. Let's move on to the next question, ma'am. Professor Suresh HS is asking me this question. In COVID-19 pandemic situation, socialization process in all sorts of life is too diminishing. Very well said. How can we effectively use socialization process in the society during this condition? Ma'am, I think on behalf of you, I should thank this person for raising a wonderful question, ma'am. It's a feat to a sociologist to answer this question. What is your opinion, ma'am?
Yes, thank you so much for that question again. This pandemic, as I was suggesting, is only asking us to stay away physically, not socially. We are not expected to refrain ourselves from the social contacts with our near and dear ones. It is very much essential to stay in touch, but not physical touch. That is the only difference. Human beings need this sense of belongingness. The sense of belongingness is extremely important. During these times also, I would suggest, please stay in touch with your near and dear ones. We have seen many instances of suicides, and the instances of mental depression is surging like anything. The violence against women has increased. Many people within their domestic spaces are not feeling comfortable. They are not confident enough of staying safe within their own personal domestic spaces. This is because we are not limited to the constraints of four walls. Our social setting is much wider. It encompasses the society at large. And I would suggest that we should keep ourselves open for interaction with our family, friends, anybody else who would require our intervention. I was just reading the blog post of one of my friends. She is somebody who loves to talk, and she was saying, uh, I am the kind of person who would go to Google to ask for directions than go to some other person to ask for directions. But my friend, She is somebody who believes in this physically talking to people. She was saying, if you go to talk to somebody now, they go away. That's because of the fear of somebody spreading the disease. It's good. It's necessary that we maintain this kind of social distances, and we have to stay away physically from each other. But do not stay away from your family, friends, or the immediate society mentally. Do not stigmatize anybody. Do not look at other human beings as carriers of disease. Look at them as individuals, as human beings with feelings who also love to interact with others. This is very, very important. This is what I feel. And the principles of sociology also suggests that you have to interact with people. Various theories have proposed this. There is something called as the concept of sociological imagination proposed by Charles Wright Mills. He says individuals are never in isolation. Our social situation, our context that we are living in today is very, very related to the society at large. The society at large is bringing in various influence upon you. My choice is influenced by the society. So when we as society are reacting to various issues like this pandemic, for instance, we must also be mindful of what are the baggages that we are carrying from the past. In situations like this, we should be away from prejudices. We should not consider any other group as an out group. Even this ban Chinese products kind of a thing that came up, as a sociologist, I would suggest do not make any group a scapegoat. Do not stigmatize anyone, because they are within their social context. They find what they are doing to be relevant to their social situations and the historical context that they are living in. And hence, we should also react in appropriate ways that is also mindful of our social context. Stay in touch mentally. Stay in touch with your social ties, but maintain a physical distance. That is what I would suggest.
Yeah. Thank you for excellently answering that question, ma'am, with very nice deliberation on that. There were a lot of dimensions in what ma'am said, participants. I hope you got a gist of what ma'am was trying to tell you all. Moving on, Professor Raja is asking this question. The future of the society, will it bring increased deviant behavior, which will be a threat to all? Yeah, I second this question, ma'am, because personally I feel that in isolation, a person's deadliest thoughts start coming over. He can be victimized for drug abuse, or he could be victimized for a physical abuse. So there are more chances in the direction in which the future may go from now on. And definitely this is a question. As a sociologist, what is your thought about it?
We have seen that the society has developed in leaps and bounds when there is a instance of chaos. There is this pressure cooker theory that I would say. A lot of pressure builds up within the society, within our minds, which needs to be vented out. And sometimes that whistle that is there on top of the pressure cooker is acting as a safety vent, which will allow you to express yourself. And the steam that is collected inside just goes away, it dissipates. In society, also, in terms of the relationships and the social networks that we have, acts as this kind of a whistle. In current situation, in the times of these pandemics that we are going through today, we have not seen this earlier. Yesterday, I was listening to the deliberations of a doctor. She was expressing how they were not equipped to deal with this kind of a situation. Neither was she theoretically prepared, nor was she actually prepared in the real terms to deal with this kind of a scenario. All of us today are in a state of flux, a chaos that we are not able to make sense of. But what we need right now is to be able to guide one another, to be able to be present with one another. That is where the importance of social networks comes in.
Very well, ma'am. Yes. Thank you for answering that question. Hello, ma'am. Are you with us?
faith that somebody else is there looking up for me, somebody is there who is going to ensure that I am not in trouble, will go a long way. If I lose job today, I should have somebody who is going to, who I can fall back onto to support me. This is there in the Indian society. And that is exactly why I was talking about this localization of the responses. In the Indian context, we always have our family, immediate family, the extended joint family groups, our community as such, caste groups, all these things are there to take care of you. This is not a westernized individual kind of a society where you are left to fend for yourself. Indian situation is extremely suitable and ideal for various coping strategies. We have this coping mechanism. You might feel that you are in a pressure cooker today because of this pandemic. The aspect, the social relationships, our networks are always there. You just have to reach out to someone. This I'm especially yesterday after that Sushant Singh Rajput's instance, I felt very deeply about this. Was there anybody else he could rely on, somebody to talk to? Because these kind of actions happen the spur of a moment. If you talk to somebody at that moment, it just goes away. It's not there. If that is possible, as a society, we will succeed. And as a sociologist, I would suggest please keep your network ties together and strong. Weak ties are also important, just as the strong ones are. So please be in a social network. That would be my suggestion to combat this COVID-19 and mitigate the effects of COVID-19.
Excellently answered, ma'am. I really have to appreciate you for not just giving the answer to that particular question, but also raising that question's overall view and then answering it. This approach of yours is highly appreciable. That's what I feel. Moving on to Professor Syed Khadar's question, who has asked this question in a Khadarful way. Why most of the highly intellectual person's BP is not stable? Because of management of brain and mind makes the reason for it? I fail to convincingly understand. Do I need to modify or correct the perception based on principle, condition, and framework? Tough question for you, ma'am.
It's, I would again like to draw upon this basic fundamental belief of sociology. Nothing is right, nothing is wrong. We do not judge any behavior. If there is a smoker, we do not say your smoking behavior is right or wrong as sociologists. We only look upon that behavior, contextualize that behavior, and say why you are smoking, what are the implications of that smoking, and we would provide various options for that person to realize and make his own decisions as to the correctness or the wrongness of the behavior. If somebody is able to look at their own context and their own situations and come up with their own solutions for it, then sociology and sociologists have succeeded. There is no right behavior, there is no wrong behavior. It is only the individual who should decide if that behavior is right or wrong. We will give you approaches, we will give you various means to find out what way you are approaching your issue. Are you in a certain path? Are there different paths? What are the other paths? And what would be the appropriate one is a solution that you will find for yourself. In this COVID-19 situation, it can be looked at in various ways. If I look at it as a boon, we can see and we can say that various changes have happened, uh, especially in terms of educational sector. Things that would have taken almost 5-6 years to happen has now happened over a span of few months. This is a positive change. While again looking at the deterring effects, the negative effects of it, we have increased the inequalities in certain way. So for instances like this, we actually have to go back to our own knowledge, our own social context, to identify if the path that we are taking is right or wrong. And that I would say is my answer for this question.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. Moving on, ma'am, there is another question. And of course, I had raised this particular concern while I was interacting with you. Professor Kamalesh Kumar is asking this question, ma'am, how to avoid addiction of any kind? Hello, Manjula, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay. The question, can I read it out once again?
Yes, yes, please. Yes, I missed it.
Yeah, I could understand. Professor Kamalesh Kumar is asking this question, ma'am, how to avoid addiction of any kind?
Addictions. The sociological theories again say addiction as such is a negative behavior. And this theory is not coming out of an individual sociologist response. Addiction is a behavior, just as every behavior has different sides. There is a saying in Kannada which says, Ati adre amrutanu vishagate anta. Addiction is something like that. Society already has various norms in place. It has kept various uh, constraints, various rules and regulations, which says this is the behavior you can follow, this is the behavior you cannot follow. If you're getting into substance abuse or some other addiction, your society around you is giving you various hints. It is telling you this is not right. Your friends, your family, the immediate social circle, all these are giving you hints. And it is up to us to accept these hints, to take it, to uh, follow what they are trying to tell, and to fall in the right track. If we do not do so, the society will definitely ostracize you. No smoker is accepted by the society as a non-smoker, or no addicted person is accepted or welcomed into a social group as a normal person. So these kind of behaviors is already giving us hints, and various other governing agencies, health agencies, various other social institutions are giving you references and telling you do not do this. And if you still want to go do it, sociology cannot answer that. It is your behavior that needs to be changed. It is your ideas that needs to be reframed. There is this theory in sociology, the theory of re-socialization. What we learn once can be relearned, unlearned. These are concepts that we must be able to fall in line with. When we do that, when we unlearn these kind of bad practices and relearn good practices, we will again be in line with what is accepted as the normalcy in the regular society. That is my answer for this.
Ma'am, thank you very much. And sir has already thanked you. He says, excellently answered to my question, madam. Thank you very much. That was the feedback of Mr. Kamalesh. Ma'am, if you permit me, I would also like to add a little bit to your answer. Can I?
Please, sir, please go ahead.
Mr. Kamlesh, I would just quote one of my most all-time favorite poets, whom I have kept on listening to right from my birth. Sharif Ajja, we call him as Sharif Ajja, is Shishunala Sharifa. He says, ಲೋಕದ ಕಾಳಜಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಂತಿ ನಿಂಗ್ಯಾರ್ ಬ್ಯಾಡಂತಾರ ಮಾಡಪ್ಪ ಚಿಂತಿ ನೀ ಮಾಡೋದು ಗಳಿಗೆ ಸಂತಿ ಮೇಲಾಗಿ ಕಟ್ಟಬೇಕಂತಿ ಆನೆ ಅಂಬಾರಿ ಏರಬೇಕಂತಿ ಮಣ್ಣಲ್ಲಿ ಇಳಿಯೋದ ತಣ್ಣಗ ಮರ್ತಿ ಬದುಕು ಬಾಳೆವು ನಂದೆ ಅಂತಿ ನಿಧಿ ಸೇರಿದಷ್ಟು ಸಾಲ್ದು ಅಂತಿ ಕದ ತೆರೆದ ಕಡೆಗೆ ಜಾತ್ರೆ ನಡೆಯುವಾಗ ಯಾವಾಗ ಯಾವುದು ಅಂತ ಸುಮ್ಮನ ಅಳತಿ. For all non-Kannadiga participants, Shishanala Sharif happens to be a poet who touched the lives of ordinary people by writing in colloquial Kannada. And he was the one to first identify how to link oneself to God. And he says that instead of blaming the society, instead of blaming people, instead of unnecessarily roaming around everywhere and trying to claim that you will help everybody, why don't you start helping yourself? The moment you start identifying what you are, then you would start building up yourself rather than building buildings. And when you start looking into yourself and start building the buildings, definitely one will not have any grasp towards any grab towards these addictions of whatever question you said. So the answer for your question is self-realization. The moment you realize what you are and what you want to become, then definitely you will not move on towards addictions. So these are two different dimensions answers that you have got, sir. One is from commerce and one is from sociology.
There is this one question from Dr. Anupama that I would like to answer, sir.
Please, ma'am.
She's asking, in this COVID-19, we are facing enormous challenges which has very harmful impact in all the dimensions of our lives. It may be public health, the labor system, social interaction, political debate, or the use of public space. COVID-19 is hitting severely. As a sociologist, what's your opinion to mitigate it? This is what she's asking, and I would like to answer this question. Dr. Anupama, as a sociologist, I would like to state that society is something that is not evident in a single layer. It is a combination, or rather a flux of various activities that we do as individuals. If we look at ourselves, we are playing multiple roles. We are connected with n number of people, and each of these interactions and each of these connections are very unique. When we are saying just stay away from people, maintain this physical distance or a lockdown situation, what this does is it disrupts the everyday life that we are familiar with. And because of this disruption, various other activities gets impacted. As a consumer, I'm not going out to buy certain things. As a service provider, I'm not going and fulfilling my obligations. So it's not just the economy as such that is getting impacted. There are various other things which is also being impacted because of this one response that I am showing to a particular pandemic. And because of this, we have far-reaching consequences. Many of these consequences will not even be evident right now. This will surface only later. Say, for instance, many of the students are now going in for online classes. We are attending this kind of virtual programs. If this kind of interactions increases, then what is going to happen to our everyday interaction is a question that will be pertinent in the minds of all of us. So what happens here, what kind of scenarios are going to emerge is something that we need to wait and watch. As sociologists, I would say, please rely on your existing networks. Again, I go back to my training as a social network theorist, where in every kind of a situation, especially more so in this kind of a chaos, it is important to rely on our networks. Because together we can, as they say, together we can. Together in a network, you are able to come up with new strategies, construct new areas to dwell in, come up with new options that can actually make life easier for everyone. Um, so this is, as we say, we look for not only ourselves, but also for our immediate community. If this is ingrained in our minds, then definitely we'll have a better tomorrow. And this chaos might be a blessing which can lead to new changes and a better prospects for the future.
Excellently answered, ma'am. I really have to appreciate this, the way in which you are handling each and every question. You go right to the depth of the question and you are answering it. And that is what all the participants are also giving their feedback. They are saying that your lecture was extremely good and the answers that you are giving is also nice. Sridevi has just, ma'am, Sridevi ma'am has thanked you now. Ma'am, that would, yeah. So I think this would bring us to the end of one of the most stimulating is the word that I got while I was thinking what should be my end statement. It was a stimulating lecture that we had, ma'am. So let us, I mean, are there any further questions, dear participants? I don't want to deprive you of your chance of asking questions. No, ma'am, you are saved. With that, we have come to, okay, there is a question from Angel Babu. You are an angel to me. Ma'am, one of my Neighbor attempted suicide. When I asked his friends, why did he attempt suicide? They said it is because of the affair problem. He's just 21 years old. Can you comment on this situation? Ma'am, I think, ma'am, you have an answer to this sort of a question very well,
But
but
I would like to take up this question
please,
again, sir,
please, you
because
have to, you
we
have to.
saw this question earlier as well, and I would like to
Please
uh,
elaborate on that
take a
from
take on
the
this.
youth perspective, ma'am.
Yeah, suicide is something that is, again, as I was talking about Professor Durkheim, who says is not an individual thing. Here, this person has the stigma attached to his actions. You can see in the question, the person himself is saying that he had some affair problem. So, here there are two aspects that we would like to answer as sociologists. First is stigmatizing a person's relationship. We are putting this label that what action that person is doing is wrong. The society is doing it. And then the second thing is how we are taking it up and again talking with others about it. When this person committed suicide, you have attached a stigma that he was in a wrong relationship because of which he died. And again, by reiterating this instance again and again, you're telling to other people that this kind of a relationship is wrong. So, for other people also who are trying to venture into this kind of a relationship, you're telling, don't do this. The society is going to look at you in a negative way. First of all, the way that person has understood what is his relationship status is wrong. And then the way we are reacting to that as a stigmatized thing, we are assuming. I would like to ask, did that person say he's ended his life because he's having an affair? Or has he ended his life because the society reacted in a wrong way to his response? This is very, very important. And as sociologists, this detail is extremely important for us because we are placed in a social network. Again, going back to that network, our network permits certain things. It says you can indulge in this kind of activities and you are supposed to refrain from this kind of activities. And during the process of socialization, we've given many instances to that particular individual about what is to be done and what is not to be done. If the person has not taken the sociological cues and the socialization information that he's got, then the society has failed in socializing him properly and he has failed in getting inputs from other socializing agents in the society. Socializing agents, there are innumerable socializing agents, especially at today's context. We have schools, we have peer groups, we have the internet, we have various chat groups where a person can go to get help. There are various suicide helpline numbers which could have saved a precious life. So instead of just taking a random action and just going and committing some impulsive action, the person should have definitely thought of himself as a part of society and reacted appropriately. That would have avoided this case of somebody losing their life unnecessarily. That is my answer. And the stress and this kind of things can only be combated with the help of our social network. This is what I would like to say about this aspect.
Thank you for taking up that question, ma'am. Moving on to the next question. Dr. Arundhati Badami has asked this question. COVID-19 ಸಂಬಂಧಗಳನ್ನ ಸಡಿಲಿಸುತ್ತಿದೆಯಾ? ಕೋವಿಡ್-19 ಸಂಬಂಧಗಳನ್ನ ಸಡಿಲಿಸುತ್ತಿದೆಯಾ ಅಂತ
ಇಲ್ಲ
ಕೇಳ್ತಾ
ಇಲ್ಲ,
ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಕೋವಿಡ್ ಖಂಡಿತ ಇಲ್ಲ. COVID-19 ಅಲ್ಲೇನೆ ನಾವು ಹಲವು ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಸಂಬಂಧಗಳಿಗೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಆ, ಆ, ಆತ್ಮೀಯತೆ ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಕಂಡುಕೊಳ್ಳಕ್ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗಿದೆ. This is a situation where we have even thought of people who were not in touch with us for a long time. At least this has happened with me. I am not sure about everybody. We had a lot of time. We've thought of our school friends, childhood groups, all these peoples, all these social networks have actually come into the forefront. So I would say, in terms of maintaining this contact with the social groups, COVID-19 has been sort of a blessing because we've seen our lives from a different perspective. Apart from that work, in fact, many of us, our identity is our work. If somebody asks me, who are you? I would say I am an academician, I'm a sociologist. That work is coming in the forefront. But because of this COVID-19 and the small break that we got, sort of a break that we got, has enabled us to get back to ourselves. Many of us have pondered on various things, come up with new hobbies. and indulged in various other activities, because of which I would say social networks or this friendships or the social relationships are not disrupted in this particular situation, and society is going strong. We've seen many groups coming up to help each other, and communities reorganizing themselves, restructuring in such a way that they are there for each other. So COVID-19 is a blessing of sorts also at many times.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am. Because even that was an extended answer to the question I was about to ask. Professor Rajendra Junja is asking, COVID-19 is a boon, not a curse for our happy and healthy life. Please comment. An extremely
It
difficult
definitely is.
question. Mm.
Again, uh, it depends on our perspective. Being in a privileged position where I still have my job, I have my house, I have my salary coming in every month, it is a privilege. And this is because of my social position that I am in. I'm able to look at COVID-19 as a positive aspect. But looking at the situation of a migrant laborer, a daily wage earner whose everyday source of earning has gone, it wouldn't be so rosy a picture. So I would say, as I was again telling, we need to localize and we need to look at the situation from the perspective of an individual, from the perspective of a social actor who is embedded in a particular social situation. It's not the same response for everybody. I am not losing anything because of this COVID situation. In fact, because of my social position, I'm doing much better than what I was doing earlier. But this is not the same for people who are marginalized, people who are in the forefront of this war against this COVID. They are in a very tough place, which I would say is definitely not a positive thing for them, and the world would have been a better place without COVID for those people. So, as sociologists, again, we have to look at the context and the social positioning of an individual. I would say most of the groups in the society today are affected, are impacted. Not all of us are looking at this in a very positive way. And it would be really great and it would be a blessing if this situation goes away as soon as possible. And if all of us can contribute in making this possible in our own small ways.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to the next question, Professor Irama Patel has asked this. Due to today's scenario, most are in stress and anxiety. But being a social animal, we hesitate to consult a psychiatrist. Please comment on this.
Yeah. Uh, Again, here I would like to go back to our social settings in the Indian family, the great Indian joint family. Even though we don't have so many joint family setups right now, today, we still have that bonding. It's not as in Western society. The Western society emphasizes the concept of I, but in Indian context, it is not I that is there. It is the concept of we. Uh, Everything that we do, all our actions are always oriented towards the other person. That is how we are taught. If we look at the social context of a Japanese culture or the social context of a Western culture vis-a-vis the context that we have in our society today, it is very different. In Indian society, we always have somebody to look after us. There is one more question also which has come up here. I would like to answer this along with that. ಹೊರಗಿನ ಸಂಬಂಧಗಳಿಗೆ COVID-19 ಕಡಿವಾಣ ಹಾಕಿದೆಯಾ ಅಂತ. Actually, COVID-19 is not curtailing anybody's relationships. What has happened is we need to restructure at how we are looking at things. Earlier, we were going to wish a friend personally to wish in a birthday, but today we are wishing that friend with the same affection and love, but that presence is not there. The physical presence is not there, but that emotion is there. So I would suggest here today we have to think about the emotional contact with others, emotional presence to other social human beings, rather than looking at this physical contact. If we look at it from that perspective, I think COVID-19 is an entirely new setup, new scenario that we are still getting acclimatized to. And with social groups, we will definitely succeed in it.
Thank you, ma'am. There's one question by Professor Ibarani. She's saying that I have lost my friend last month. She hanged herself. What? She hanged herself because her husband doesn't want her in his life. Even though she was working but couldn't tackle this problem. I put my maximum effort to save her life, but I failed to do so. My other friend also in almost same situation. How can I advise them? Uh, Please give ideas.
To actually suggest something for this kind of a scenario is extremely difficult because we cannot place ourselves in the place of that person who is actually undergoing this kind of a tough situation. It's very sad to hear that a person committed suicide because her husband did not accept her. Here, I would like to say, as role, as an individual, we have multiple roles to play, and each of these roles gives us satisfaction in various ways. I, as an individual, play the role of an academician, a homemaker, a daughter, and multiple other roles. And each of these roles gives me a sense of purpose and identity. What has happened here is that this person has given too much of importance to the acceptance from a certain role that they are playing. And again, as a sociologist, there is nothing that is perfect. There is no relationship that is ideal, that is perfect in all sense. There is always something that you can do further. There is certain thing that you will feel that you could have done better. Here, this particular individual needed to have stronger ties with other social actors of which they are a group of. See, as an house homemaker, I also read that she is a working person. She was an professional. Yeah, that's what I see. She was also working. So she could have derived that sense of satisfaction or a sense of purpose and achievement from her other roles instead of focusing too much on one role. So one person is not a single identity. It is not about one role that you are performing. There are various dimensions to your personality. There are various ways in which you are useful to the society. And I would suggest all of us look at those roles. And I would suggest Iba Rani to actually, she's saying that one of her friends is also again in a similar situation. I would suggest, ma'am, please speak to that individual about the other roles that they are playing in the society, about how many other social actors are dependent on them, and how their presence in the society is extremely crucial. This is very important. Nobody can replace us. The role that we are playing in society is something that is irreplaceable. The formal roles can be replaced. Somebody else can take my position as the assistant professor of sociology in my college, but the uh, informal roles that I am playing is something that is irreplaceable. So every individual must be aware of the multiple social roles that we are playing and how critical it is for us to be in that particular role, and how we cannot detach ourselves by an act such as suicide and say, okay, I'm done with it, because that role can never be replaced by anybody else. This would be the answer to this question, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Professor Iba, ma'am, I would just like to just put my thoughts openly. It's so disappointing that a friend of yours committed suicide for that reason. What does husband or a wife to do with one's life? It is your life, which is solely dependent on you. Your life trusts you. I really don't understand this, and it's so saddening. I thought I would just tell you this, ma'am. Please tell to your other friend to start loving herself. That is the only simple solution. If she comes to know what a wonderful human being she is, then definitely she would. If somebody does not like us, quotes dash to them. That's what I say. I'm sorry, but this is, man, we are living for ourselves, not this. You please tell to your friend, or please give their number to me. I and Manjula ma'am will collectively do something, and we will make them to start believing on them instead of moving on to this particular thought. It's unbelievable, ma'am. I'm
It is
shocked.
also because of the Indian society, sir, that has given so much of importance to marital relationships, the approval from the spouse, the approval from the family, these things have been given a lot of importance. I think as a society that is growing, we should also be open to our individual identities as well now. Because India, as I was already saying, is something which has a culture which speaks about the we, navu, nannadu alla, navu, nammadu, annodhadu. It's not about me, it's about us. That is the kind of thing it is good also, but we should also draw a line about how much we will be able to uh, fit into the role that the society expect us to play, and how much we are going to speak for ourselves. Society already has made provisions for this kind of things. We have various established systems in place, like she could have gone for a divorce, or she could have gone for counseling. Many other aspects were available. This should be, it should not even be the last resort. In fact, suicide is a criminal act. That's all, period. Nobody should even contemplate about it.
Yeah, ma'am. I totally agree to this point. So disappointing that one could go to this extent. The only answer to this solution is to make them believe what they truly are. Let them play their role by stopping to play various other roles. The first beginning is from them. Mallikarjun is saying, Maneya Mantralaya, Manase Devalaya. Thanks, sir, for bringing in some lighter mood to this deliberation.
And religion again is very important, sir. This is a dimension that I forgot to consider. Um, can I go on? Do we
Yeah,
have
please,
time?
please, please, ma'am, please move on.
Okay, okay.
Because
This
one
is
of
this
the topics that I never understood in my life is the influence of religion on these things. I strongly believe that it is your religion which always supports you and which fosters for your growth. That is what I always believe. What is your take about it, ma'am?
religion is something that gives you a boundary within which you can work. You know, just imagine a situation where we have to wake up every day and think of what is the aspects, the rituals that I'm supposed to do. Should I brush or not? Should I take bath or not? Should I go to work or not? These kind of things will actually put a person into a lot of stress. But religion, especially, I'm sorry, I'm not taking any religion name as such. Every religion has beautifully designed a way of life for us. You wake up, and as per your religious orientations, you do certain activities which actually sets your pace for the day. And religion is something that actually makes you think in a different way, think in a certain dimension. It brings in various aspects, it defines things for you. It does not leave an individual to grope around in the dark. It is paving light to your path and saying this is how you can go. Even in terms of this COVID-19 situation, if we are left to ourselves to think that you are responsible totally for your actions, it will put a lot of stress on us. But if you are told there is some supernatural power that is going to take care of it in the long run, don't worry, just do your part. That will give a lot of solace to an individual. Even in terms of this, people who are contemplating suicide and all those things, if there is a religious dimension to it, they might look at it from a different perspective. They might think, since I am not responsible for my own birth, I am not the creator of the destiny in which I am. Somebody else is doing that for me. That stress is gone out of your mind. Uh, I would say, this is what even Marx said. He said, religion is the opium of masses. It puts you in some sort of a trance. We shouldn't go to such an extent that we are in a trance because of religion, but I would suggest that we take all those positive aspects, the positive guidelines that we get from a religious background, and use it, inculcate it in our everyday lives, so that we are a better individual, we are better equipped to deal with life every day. So religion is very the the guiding factor of our lives, and I would say it is essential to a great extent.
Definitely, I agree with you, ma'am. I totally agree that religion is always a channel that a person should use to reach to his higher ends, to reach to his spiritual needs, and to condition and discipline one's living. And religion must always be taken in that way, and that is what we all generally do. As you said, religion has got its own importance and impact on one's life. With this, I think we have come to uh, one of the most intriguing sessions we ever had. I used that word intriguing. It was an intellectual deliberation, ma'am. I definitely underline that statement of mine. It was an intellectual deliberation that we had. We took various questions, various dimensions into consideration, and you deliberated on that. So, may I now call upon Professor Kavita Patil, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Government First Aid College, Frasertown, Bangalore, to formally propose vote of thanks to you and to be the voice of hundreds of participants who are waiting. Some are standing to say thank you to you. 1 minute.
Good afternoon, madam. I think it is more about psychological rather than sociologically COVID-19. So good afternoon, madam and dear participants. As said by Kiran Majumdar, ultimately the greatest lesson that COVID-19 can teach humanity is that we are all together in this. It is my privilege to propose vote of thanks for today's session. I, on behalf of Government First Grade College, Frasertown, Bangalore, and the organizing team extend a hearty thanks to Honorable Speaker Dr. Manjula, who blessed us with her presence and took out a valuable time of her busy schedule. I thank you, Madam. I also thank our Principal Professor M.G. Vani, IQAC Coordinator and organizing team for their hard work and commitment in organizing this FDP. I also thank all the participants for their interest and enthusiasm. I thank you, one and all. So Girish sir has one announcement.
Before that,
Participants.
thank Girish sir. Thank you. I thank the entire organizing team of GFGC Frasertown. I thank our principal, Vani ma'am, for having given me this opportunity. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much, ma'am. Participants, I had assured you, I had promised you that we would be having a scholarly deliberation, and I was proved right. Once again, we had scholarly deliberation. Thanks to Manjula ma'am. Please don't go. Manjula ma'am, can I have you for a second? Are you there, ma'am? Yeah, thank you. Dear participants, I would also like to add, I was waiting for the formal vote of thanks because I didn't wanted to meddle in that, nor I wanted to tell it in the beginning. Yesterday and today, while introducing Manjula ma'am, I told you all that she happens to be a good friend of mine and a wonderful person. There was a reason for that. And that is, a day before we had to start this FDP session. FDP started on Monday, and we all had a meeting on Saturday, and that was there when Manjula ma'am had come to our college. By convincing her principal and coming to our college, look at the positive energy that ma'am has. She came to us, and she, along with her another colleague, ma'am, may I know sir's name? Professor Venkata Chalapati, Physical Education Director. These two good-hearted people came to our college. We were in chaos on that day. You will not believe. We were in chaos on that day. There were a lot of technical things that were to be taken care of. I was zero in YouTube live streaming. I don't know all that. I am an ordinary teacher somewhere. So it was ma'am and it was sir who helped us a lot. And that was the time where I felt that, yes, there is a wonderful result in getting associated. Ma'am, I think truly you lived up to your profession being a sociology teacher. Now you, in my opinion, I really don't know much about you, but in my opinion, whatever you did to us on that day and on the coming day, every day Professor Venkata Chalapati says, good morning to you all. He is not in this college. He is not here. The moment the streaming starts, professor says, good morning, welcome. Look at this connect that sir has, ma'am has to the cause. And that is what make you both special people. Ma'am, on behalf of all the staff members of my college, I really thank you for being associated with us and for agreeing to have an intellectual deliberation. Thanks a lot, ma'am. Now I'll allow you to go. Dear participants, as usual, please stay with me for a couple of minutes and do put me up for another 2 minutes. I have a wonderful news to you all. I was waiting for one session. No, I keep waiting for all the session, but this is one particular session that I'm particularly interested in because I'm a great fan of history, and I strongly believe that our present has no meaning without its past. So I believe whatever we are today is the contribution of what we had. And in order to know what we had, it is very imperative for us to know what we were at that time and what we had. So with that note, dear participants, do not miss tomorrow's session, which will be a wonderful deliberation that we have arranged for from a scholarly professor, a deliberate researcher, I would call. That is because she happens to be my colleague, and I know the pains that she had taken while doing her PhD research. And ma'am, Dr. Vasudha N will be the resource person tomorrow, and she shall be deliberating on a bird's eye view on wonders that was India. A historical perspective of what India was. I bet openly that in spite of you knowing history, in spite of I knowing history, it is worth listening to an eloquent professor who would be telling us, would be giving us a glimpse of what we were at that stage. So please don't miss tomorrow's session. So tomorrow, please log in at 11. So be with us throughout the session. And like how you did not spare Manjula ma'am today, do not ever spare Vasudha ma'am. She is very good at taking and answering questions. So let's have another intellectual deliberation, and let's have a wonderful session tomorrow. And thank you all for joining with us today. I hope we have met your expectations. I know we have met your expectations. Thank you very much. With that note, have a wonderful afternoon. Don't forget to have a romantic evening and have a safe night. Bye.